going to fade out the music and say thank you. Thank you everyone for showing up. I am Maryann Kongovi, and I am excited to talk to you about how to pay people. Let me see if this slideshow will start. Okay, so why me? Why am I talking about this? So for better or for worse, I've ended up being in a position to set compensation strategy at a few different places. Most recently at Pave, owner of Option Impact, and built it from scratch actually at Algolia, and also at Code for America. In both those last two places, I was running people and operations, and it's just one of those things that just fell on my plate. Also, like many of you, right, I've hired people, I've managed people, and it's important, right? It's a key thing to get right, and it's something that takes up a lot of time if it's not done correctly. And more importantly, I really want to help. The theme, I would say, of all the places where I've been involved in this and all the companies I've advised on this is generally people really want to do the right thing, but it's quite hard, right? It's hard to get the data, it's hard to do the process, and there's nothing more important than people being fairly compensated. So for all those reasons, I'm thrilled that you're here, and I'm happy to talk about this any day. So to get everyone in the mood and to sort of see who we have in the room, I wanted to kind of open it back up to you and ask everyone, what's the best non-monetary benefit you've ever received? You can put that in the chat. As any rewards professional will tell you, money is important, but it's not the only thing. And I'm just curious what, as you think about the jobs that you've had, the best thing you've had from an employer that wasn't money. Okay, yeah, career growth. Oh, thank you, email. That's nice. That's free. Good manager, yeah. Any actual like benefit or something creative that someone's done? Although I'm going to use the email. Thank you, email. That's definitely easy to do. Okay, flexible hours. Yes, I love flexible hours too. Okay, so diving in, how I'm going to break this huge topic. I just want to set the stage for how this works end to end in the places that I've been involved in this. We're not obviously going to cover all of this. This is a huge topic, but just want to give you the perspective of like, how does this typically all fit together? So foundation is absolutely data, which we'll talk about. How you apply that data, how you think about paying is your compensation philosophy, which we'll also talk about. And then how you set that pay for individuals is connected to your compensation bands, which we'll also talk about. Pay scorecard is something bigger companies tend to do, which is just to understand how you're paying people relative to how you want to pay them. And then the comm stuff, listening to their story, understanding their needs, how you communicate, telling your story is sort of the end-to-end process and packaging of compensation, more of a big company thing, but just putting it here for completeness. So what we'll cover today, like I mentioned, is that the foundation, so the data, philosophy, and the bands. And because I got a sense from the questions submitted when you registered, there's a very big range of topics of interest and different levels of understanding and background. I want to make sure that as I look at my watch, at the half-hour mark, if possible, we actually get into the Q&A so that this is really customized to the needs of your particular situation and frankly, why you showed up to spend an hour of your time with me. Any questions before I dive in on this? Feel free to throw it in the chat as well if you prefer. Or otherwise, thumbs up. This looks like a good use of time. We should keep going. Okay, thank you. Okay, oh, and what we won't cover, because some people did ask about this, the co-founder package. And the reality is, and I checked with folks that work in this space day in, day out, there isn't reliable data. However, happy to brainstorm with folks who have any particular situation, because I have been involved in some custom situations, but ultimately there isn't good reliable data, so it's hard to talk about this in a generalizable way. Okay, so building the pyramid. So we're going to start with picking the data set. Okay, so before we dive in even further, I'm just curious for those of you on the call, what do you use today when you set compensation? And feel free to put it in the chat. What are you already familiar with? What do you use? Oh, Glassdoor, yep. Carter, Radford, yep. Oh, AngelList, interesting. Pave, yeah, we'll talk about Pave for sure. Option Impact, okay. Pave. Oh, good, a lot of people know Pave. Great. I'd forgotten about Glassdoor, I'll admit, because I don't know if it's verified, so I didn't mention it. Okay, so the good news is there is free data. Pave was mentioned. Also, I'll share levels.fyi is really good up to the manager level, and it's a free searchable database. It's employee submission, and they verify it with, I think, pay stubs and W-2, so you can rely on it. It's very, very strong and has very, very deep data sets for technical roles. And I've definitely used it to sort of triangulate when I found data that I'm sort of unsure about. So I'd highly recommend that. And then, as many of you on the call already know, Pave and now Pave and Option Impact is a great resource, and it's nice because it's free and it's a give to get model. And the thing that I love about it as well is that it's real-time data. Okay, so someone mentioned Carta. So Carta Total Compensation is, it's a paid product, but they also have a formidable data set, 3,000 companies in their peer set. Obviously very strong in the venture-backed startup community. You do have to pay, the minimum spend is around $12.50 a year, but it's another fine option, and it's bundled with tools, so comp planning and comps tools. And then last is PayScale. I don't know if any of you have used it, familiar with it. Yeah, I see some nodding heads. It's more expensive, but wow, they have a lot of data. I think I heard they have like 1.5 billion data points. So if you're global, if you're in a niche market, so I'm advising a company right now with a team in Pakistan, for instance, they have a deep data set of engineering salaries in Pakistan. So it's another resource if you have a team that's in a market outside of the US. Okay, so as this is a group focused on the early stage, you probably already know this, but just to summarize, like how low can you go, right? Like how detailed can you get the data set for? So Pave as low as sub 5 million raise, sub 25 million valuation, Carta sub 10 million valuation, and then PayScale, the minimum level is less than 25 employees. Okay, and then if you haven't seen Pave, I just thought I'd sort of share the UI because it's pretty friendly, and all the drop downs kind of give you a sense of like the things that you can toggle. Okay, any questions on the data options before we move on? And feel free to put it in the chat as well. I can't see everyone's face, so speak up if you have one. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, so this is probably intuitive to most of you, but thought I would just share as you think about how packages change by stage. So probably again, very familiar for all of you, the later stage you are, the cash tends to increase, the options tend to decrease, and bonuses tend to come in at the point where you can actually set targets that people are willing to take on. So to put a finer point on this, was with some help from the benchmarking team over at Pave, was able to pull this graphic, which I thought was pretty interesting, which shows exactly what this looks like in the case of an IC engineer. So if you are starting, joining when they're less than 10 people, you can expect to get a much bigger chunk, a meaningfully bigger chunk of equity than if you join later. So again, probably no surprises here, but this is another great way to use these tools, which is just to look by stage and see what the grants look like, and it can help guide how you think about putting these together. And I'll be sharing this deck for those of you who are keen to see this data up going forward. Okay, so any questions about that, or if not, we'll keep going. Okay, so the philosophy, and we're making good time to get to the Q&A, which is good news too. Oh, I think I saw a hand raised. Yep.
Hi, thank you. Just wondering, do you have engineers or product managers that already have leveling? On your previous chart, do we have a breakdown regarding leveling? Just in general, like new grads or less than 3 years or more than 5 years, do I have a breakdown chart for each of the leveling?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't have it broken down by the chart, but you can definitely break it down. In the case of Pave, as an example, they have like entry, mid, and senior. Have the guidance, I think when I got this, I confirmed that this actually is all the levels blended, because there isn't a ton of data, especially for the like sub 10. But the guidance is, I think I don't have it in the note. The feedback I got was, hey, if it's sort of on the 25th percentile, they're probably more of entry level. And then if they're on the 75th percentile, they're probably more senior, and they've been able to leverage and get a higher stake. The tough part is, if you can see from the note, there are only 18 data points for that like sub 10 employee phase. So that's where it's a blended number to get. Because if it's less than, I think I forget if it's 5 or 10. If it's less than a certain number of data points, they just can't show the data. So that this is definitely blended. But yeah, great question. Great question. Okay, so setting your philosophy. A bit of Dwight to lighten the mood. So curious, for those of you who have had one, or if you have one, does anyone have one today? Yeah, I see a nod. Okay, okay. And then for those of you that don't have one, have you ever seen one? Okay, I've got some shaking heads. Yeah, I'll admit I was at Google, I think, almost 7 years before I knew what their compensation philosophy was. I knew they paid, and they paid well, but I didn't know what it was. And it was only when I was in a manager training about compensation, because I was having to give decisions, that I even knew what it was. So there's definitely more of a trend to be transparent, and it can be like a benefit with hiring of just explaining your offers in the context of the compensation philosophy, which is what I'm a big fan of. So early stage, at a minimum, it's useful as a methodology. It can be a way to explain how you want to pay people and how you pay them as they progress with your business. And this is where it also sets expectations, right? So instead of having people randomly saying, when will I, when will I get paid, or like when are adjustments happening, or like, are you taking into account inflation, which is a common topic right now? And a philosophy can be very explicit. We review salaries annually, or we review the market biannually, whatever it is, and then it's there and it's your FAQ. Later stage companies, it also reflects values. There can be kind of funny things in there too, which I can share, and there's articles about this too. Okay, so enough ranting about like why I think everyone needs one. Here's an example of one if you haven't seen one. This I actually took from a really nice article on Pave's blog, Compensation Philosophies We Love, and it's linked here. And again, I'll share the deck afterwards. But this has the hallmarks of like a very well-rounded philosophy. It explains their idea of committing to fair pay, how they use the data, and what you can expect when you're going through that process. There's more to it, but I thought this was kind of a high level. And again, there's great examples online you can use if you're so inspired to build your own. Okay, so now building your band. So how many of you have compensation bands built? Okay, some hands. Okay, great. Okay. So for those of you that haven't, this is a very typical format, and I'll share the template. In fact, I can put it in the I'll put it in the chat as well. Oh, maybe unsure. Okay. So general concept here is you may have multiple engineers at a given level, and they won't necessarily all be paid the same thing because of their seniority in that level, right? There's an idea that when you're just promoted into a level, you're at the beginning of the range, which is another way of saying compensation band. And when you're meeting expectations and performing well in the level, you should be at that midpoint. And then when you're excelling in the role, but maybe not quite ready for promotion, you would be in the sort of high point. So that's why there's a range. And it can be perfectly fair and appropriate based on performance for people to be paid differently for the same role based on their experience and impact. Something to think about as your team grows and as you're building these different bands is how wide you want these bands to be. So how this is calculated is you decide what you want the midpoint of the band to be. In this example, I just took the 50th percentile from this data set Pave that we've been looking at. I set the range at 20%. You want it wide enough, again, that someone who's junior in the, starting out in the role can have a chance to grow in the role, to be paid more over time, especially as people aren't necessarily promoted every year. Especially as you get more senior, the bands get bigger, precisely because you can be in a level or in a certain role for multiple years. I'll pause there. Happy to get into the weeds on bands if you have those questions, or we can move on. Okay, all good. And as I said, this is a link, so you can play around with this if you don't have bands today. Okay. Oh yeah, how do I say your name? Is it Xiaodong?
Yeah, this is me.
Yes. Hey.
I saw your geo is all US based. like big metro areas. And as we now know, like we have all working from home probably for a foreseeable future, and sometimes even abroad. Just curious, like, do you have a benchmark?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the good news is there's more and more data about folks in different geos. So in the case of, I'll just stick with Pave as it's the one I know the best, you can do a benchmark for all US, or you can look at different tiers. So this is what they would call tier 1. There's tier 2, so group of different cities, and I can't remember if they have a tier 3. There are also tools actually like levels.fyi, you can type in a specific city. They may not have it, but you can search by like Austin or you know, actually New York is too similar. What would be another good example? Or Boston as an example. So it definitely exists in the data. I just put this because it's where I am. But the good news is it exists. Does that answer your question?
So, you know, with that being said, you know, if someone else work on some other country, some other city, you use a benchmark from the other geo rather than the global.
Yeah. So it's a point of the philosophy question as well, right? Which is, you have the data exists, so you have that choice, and then I guess the question is for you, how you want to compensate them. So for a different country, it's usually fairly non-controversial to say, hey, we'll pay for the, you know, the London market, the Paris market, Canadian market. Within the US, as you mentioned, because of the rise of remote work, there's definitely companies that will be happy to pay the same wherever you are, and there's good reasons to do that. Not every company does that for many reasons, but it's entirely in your hands. The good news is the data exists, so you don't have to.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, question from Laura. Okay, oh, and Mo as well. So let's see, those tiers you just mentioned, the data is available on sites like Pave. Yes, so they absolutely are. The geo tiers do exist. They're drop downs you can use on all of the sites, actually. All of the sources that I mentioned, they all have those options. Let's see, curious your perspective on comping based on where a company is HQ versus where individual is based. Is it generally accepted to tie compensation to geo if residents? What if someone is moving around? I mean, it's a great topic. We could have like a whole sidebar on that. It is the norm, quote unquote, historically, to tie it to where you're a resident. But if you're a digital nomad, it's really up to your employer, right? Does your employer want you to be in person once a month? Are you expected to do things in person with your team intermittently? So different companies have different policies. It's really up to them whether it's a hybrid or fully remote. And then if it's fully remote, what their philosophy is in terms of how they set it. No comment on like what it really depends on the strategy of the business and the talent that they're working to retain and acquire. Okay, great questions. Thank you. Okay, so bundled up in all of this, of course, is being fair to the people you hire. And this is especially challenging at the beginning because, as I mentioned before, there's very limited reliable data, or there's very limited data, and it's really an art and a science. So I love this post from Matt Shulman, who's the founder and CEO of Pave, talking about the challenge of treating employees differently based on how they negotiate. So I'll just pause so you can read. So I think that the heart of this is true actually at any stage, which is, does the amount you pay someone depend on how good they are at negotiating, or a reasonable application of your compensation philosophy once you assess someone's level and experience and the package you typically offer someone. So if there's one mistake, quote unquote, to avoid, especially in the early days, it's to not have bands, like not have a philosophy, and to have an inconsistent approach to this, to just get the person in the seat, because at some point you may end up very well with the situation this in Matt's example, which is 2 people, comparable impact, comparable scope, with very different outcomes, and which isn't good for anyone for obvious reasons. For those of you thinking about this already, and even if you have teams that you're starting to have kind of like, if you've had multiple rounds and you're bringing in new people, I highly recommend this article by Henry Ward, the founder and CEO of Carta, on their refresh policy and something they call inversion grants, which seeks to address that very issue. And again, I'll share the links afterwards. Any questions on that? Or let's see, Mo, I don't know about it. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so you're saying, is it, they made a different choice? I guess if they made a different choice. So just to read the comment, let's say you offer someone 100K salary instead of 75K, they invested it in the S&P 500 for 20 years. Obviously differences will compound exponentially. That's fair, I suppose it depends on how you feel about this example. If you think it's a fair, I guess how you define fair, right? Like if you think it's the right thing to do for the different employees, especially if, as in this example, it sounds like they're basically doing the same job. Okay, so moving on. So this is great. So we've sort of covered the basics, and now, as hoped, on early record time, wanted to hear your questions. And for those of you who have questions later or really want to get in the weeds, as I mentioned before, I love talking about this stuff and very happy to help folks trying to make these tough decisions. Feel free to schedule me, and let me put my Calendly link in here as well. Okay.